Happy New Year, Guardians fans. Can the Guardians get better in 2025 based off of two major changes they made this offseason? We'll talk about that, what depth they have at those positions that can help get them through 2025, and what New Year's resolution should the Guardians have for 2025, all on today's episode.
Tanner Bobby of the Guardians, and you're listening to Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Guardians fans and Locked On Guardians listeners? Happy New Year. Welcome back to the show. Welcome to the new year. Hope everybody had a good, happy, and safe New Year. I stayed in. We didn't really do anything. Hung out, thinking of new ways we can do stuff on the show. Really excited. Today's show, before we get started, I want to let you know is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONLB for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, we said we are going to talk about the Guardians' two major trades, obviously first base and second base. We're talking about, can the Guardians actually upgrade those positions? What can we expect now that those moves have been made? If they have any depth there, we'll look at last year versus what we could expect in 2025, as well as some New Year's resolutions, the things I think the Guardians need to get better at in 2025. Obviously, there are some obvious ones. We'll get into that, and some other ones maybe you wouldn't expect based off the trades and just based off of last year. I'm Justin Laddie, your host for today. Jeff Ellis, of course, still on vacation with family. Well-deserved time there, so you're stuck with me here. Hope you enjoy it. I have been covering the Guardians minor league system since 2007. I was formerly the editor-in-chief of Guardians Baseball Insider for a period of time. I'm also a freelancer at the News Herald and the Morning Journal. You can check out a bunch of work there. Also on Substack, you can check me out at Next Year in Cleveland or Prospects Live too. I think the Guardians list for Prospects Live is coming out soon. It should be coming out soon. So check that out. I did the majority of the legwork on that. I'm proud to say I have for a couple of years now, and I'm always really proud of those lists. So make sure you check those out as well. Let's get started with today's show, though. Let's talk about first base and second base. Let's start at first base. Obviously, that was maybe the least surprising trade, but the one that might be the most impactful based on past contributions. So we know that Josh Naylor was obviously a big part of this team's chemistry, a big part of its leadership, kind of the engine for them. You know, we see all the fun stuff, the hitting the helmet with the bat, headbutting Terry Francona in the past, all that kind of stuff has been really important for them to fire them up. Obviously, we all remember the I Want to Smoke game in Chicago in 2022. Josh Naylor has been a huge part of what this team has done over the last several years. So I think from a locker room and dugout type perspective, I don't know that Cleveland's going to get a guaranteed upgrade in 2025. Carlos Santana and Josh Naylor are very different players. And I guess it's going to depend on what exactly the Guardians need. Like, Josh Naylor has always been a fire starter, an energy booster, a guy that comes through with big hits. You know, I know on this show we talk a lot about how clutch moments are hard to measure, and RBIs are a very dependent stat on coming up with runners in scoring position, but also getting hits, not having luck with runners in scoring position, that kind of thing. That's going to be the hard thing to gauge is the heartbeat. Like, Carlos Santana has obviously been very experienced. He's been a leader. In years past, he's been beloved in this clubhouse. The only guys that are left from Carlos Santana's last stint here, I think, are basically Jose Ramirez. Like, it's a break. Shane Bieber will still be here. It's a very new team, right? This is a very new team. So, hopefully, obviously they're all going to respect him, but it's a different kind of leadership. I don't think Santana is outwardly vocal and energetic, and he's also 39. There's something of that in there. Carlos Santana is a long way off from breaking a Xbox in the Phillies locker room for playing Fortnite during the game, which, had to happen. That's not the kind of guy he always is, and that's not necessarily leadership on the field. That's off the field. The dugout thing, that's going to be a lot different. I don't know what to expect from him. We can't quantify it, but we do know how important Josh Naylor has been to the glue of this team in terms of relationships and just kind of creating some energy in the dugout, which is always needed. You'll have Austin Hedges still for that. I think Santana will be a good source of that. Jose is Jose. I think Gimenez is a part of that too. It's going to be tough to replace those things. Strictly on paper, when we talk about stats, I think there is a very realistic scenario where first base and DH looks a little better for Cleveland in 2025. And a lot of that comes from my optimism of Kyle Manzardo, truthfully. And it's whether or not you buy Kyle Manzardo's September. Let's start there, because obviously we know Carlos Santana, we know what he did last year. Technically, Carlos Santana was a more valuable player in terms of WAR, right? And that's mostly based off defense, which is, it props things up at times in terms of offense and stats. The defense, looking at WAR, that props it up sometimes. Didn't have 100 RBIs. I know that's a stat everyone likes to look at, is that nice round 100 RBI number. He had 23 home runs in 2 consecutive years. But let's start with Manzardo before we get to Santana, because I think Manzardo playing a bigger role in 2025 is kind of also a nexus here as well, right? He got a chance early last year to play and kind of struggled. And then when he came up in September, he probably should have been up sooner, but they never had room. I'm not sure what they were doing. Came up in September and had a really, really good month of September. And that's if you buy into what he did in September, if that's something he can be all the way around. So September of last year, we're looking at a guy who hit 270, 333, 540, the 147 WRC plus, a moderate strikeout rate, 26%, a walk rate of almost 9. That's good. Obviously, that's more, a little bit above what Josh Naylor does usually walk wise. Strikeout wise, it's a little bit higher as well. But I do buy what Kyle Manzardo was able to do in the month of September. It was a 300 batting average on balls in play, so nothing extremely unsustainable in terms of average on balls in play. The hard hit rate was really good. The hard hit rate was 44%. That's something that can sustain a high average on balls in play. And you also look at the where the batted ball data goes to in September for Kyle Manzardo. In September, it's 51% fly ball rate. That's something he definitely needs. And that's something he's always excelled at, was hitting the ball in the air and pulling it, which is a big reason why a guy who doesn't have the flashiest exit velocities, we're not talking, Aaron Judge's, whatever, we're talking about moderate. He gets the most out of his power, which is why we think he can do enough power-wise at a corner position. Josh Naylor, let's look at, fly ball rates. Have always not been his thing. He has generally been a guy who hits the ball on the ground a little bit more. Hard hit rate, always good for Josh Naylor. He is a guy who does hit the ball hard, truthfully, but getting the ball in the air was never really his strength. He started to do it more, which is why he finally broke out in 2022 and in 23 and 24. As a prospect, he was always a guy that struggled to hit the ball in the air when Cleveland got him, and he's gotten better at that, which is good. I think the real question between Manzardo and Naylor is this. Naylor was streaky. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, we've talked about conditioning things, whatever. That is what it is. Josh Naylor has been a guy in his career who's been very streaky. Let's look at last year, for example. Fantastic April, right? 152 WRC plus in April. And we know in 2023 he struggled in April, but was hitting the ball hard, was getting unlucky. May, it was 97. Last year, a lot of ebbs and flows. A 131 in June, down to a 106 in July, and that came with no power. That was 395 slugging. August, we're looking at a 113. In September, we're looking at a 106 with a 416 slug. So a lot of power from Josh Naylor came in April and June, and other than that, he had very average months of power. But we know when Josh Naylor got hot, he can carry a team. We've seen him have the 2 home run games. We've seen him driving all the runs. We've seen him obviously have some huge clutch hits at big times. The playoffs, we know he struggled in the playoffs too, but that was everybody, truthfully, right? Except for Brian Rocchio and I guess Lane Thomas and David Fry, a couple of guys that were really good. Josh Naylor has been known to be streaky. But when he's hot, he can carry a team, or he can really be the player behind Jose Ramirez that can really protect him. And I lineup protection is a thing we can talk about another day. We don't know that about Kyle Manzardo yet. We don't know if that's the kind of thing he can do. And I think that's a bit of a loss for Cleveland in terms of knowing that Josh Naylor has those hot streaks and he can help your team a lot with those hot streaks. And, maybe another guy steps up when he goes cold, which was something Cleveland was good at in the first half last year. When a guy was at the end of a heater, somebody else stepped up. And that's why they were so good offensively in the first half last year. We're going to have to find out if Kyle Manzardo can be that good over stretches of time. I think bringing Carlos Santana in was part of the consistency. If you look at last year, generally he's a guy who's a little more consistent. Obviously, the walk rates, all that kind of stuff we know. This team does need to walk more. But Carlos Santana last year, not a ton different, though, than Josh Naylor. He had 1 month where he had a 565 slugging percentage. That was June. His highest slugging percentage after that was 432. He had 1 month as good as Josh Naylor a year ago. The rest of it was all he's average across the board. 109 in April. 76 in April before he made some mechanical changes to his swing. A 109 WRC plus in May, 108 in July, 99 in August, 119 in September. Really, it's the walk rate for Santana. So you're replacing walks in this case. So Santana's going to bring you some defense. He's going to bring you some walks. Those are things that Josh Naylor didn't do. Kyle Manzardo, he might be able to provide that power that you're missing, and maybe that combination helps you make up for what Josh Naylor gave you, maybe improve on it. But the thing is, there's a lot of unknowns, right? We don't know that if Kyle Manzardo can carry a team like that. I think we know Carlos Santana's not going to have those stretches, honestly. I think it's more about consistency with him. It's about avoiding the lows. And I think there's going to be lows with Santana. I don't think he's going to be a guy. Look, he had a 115 WRC plus last year in the first half and a 113 in the second half. A 427 slug in the first, 411 in the second. That's not going to be as high as Naylor. I don't think we can expect that to be as high as Naylor. You are looking for on base percentage for Santana. And I think from the DH perspective for Manzardo, you're looking at the power. So is it the old Moneyball approach of 2 in the aggregate can replace 1? Maybe. I know it's not the sexiest way to look at it. But I think that's what could happen. I do really believe in Manzardo. I'll be honest with you. He was my number 1 prospect last year. I do think Manzardo can be the answer at first base long term. I really do believe that. I do believe what he did in September. I do believe what you saw in the playoffs. The other thing, too, I want to look at with Manzardo, too, is this. In the minors last year, he finally hit left-handers. He had an 842 OPS against lefties in the minors last year. He has never done that well against lefties in the minors. That may not translate to the majors. It's only 108 plate appearances, so there are no guarantees, but it's a good sign that he's never done that before, and he did it at AAA. That's something Josh Naylor took years to figure out, too, and honestly, he had ups and downs with it last year. Again, it's more unknown with Manzardo, but they're going to trust him to do that. I think there's a world where, I know we love that phrase in the show, I do think there's a chance where Santana and Manzardo, a combination of them in the lineup is better than Naylor, but you're asking 2 people to cover what one did. Efficient use of resources, considering you're paying Santana the same as Naylor. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, you're probably you're making up for Josh Naylor with those 2 players. I think that's what it is at the end of the day. I think you're making up for those 2. All right, we're going to talk about some depth behind first base, behind Manzardo. We're going to get into second base as well, talk about Gimenez, to what might be next at second base, and if they really can get an upgrade, that might be a position that's a little bit easier to see, honestly. And then we'll look at depth there, which is a little more obvious. And then we're going to talk about some things the Guardians need to get better at in 2025. And it's not just spending money, and it's not just hitting 4 home runs. There's things that we can talk about you may not expect that they can get better at in 2025. That would be a huge help as well, all coming up. It's the new year, but look, there's a lot of new events coming in the new year. We got to talk about how Gametime is making it easier for you to get tickets to your favorite events. With Gametime Picks, it filters out all the fluff to show you the best deals on great seats. It's giving you the market average. So if you're getting a great deal on these seats for the event you want to go to, it's going to tell you. That's one of the things I really like about it the most. Obviously, I've talked about how I like the seat views as well for Gametime Picks. You can check out what your seat view is going to be if you're someone who wants to know what the view from your seat is going to be like. And I always turn in all-in pricing. I hate when I'm picking out tickets to something and I look at a ticket price and I think that's what I'm going to pay. And then I get the checkout and all of a sudden there's like $30, $40, $50 in fees, honestly, more sometimes. And I don't know what I'm paying to get in the event. If you turn in the all-in pricing option on for Gametime, it's going to tell you exactly what the total cost is to get into the arena for your event. No surprise fees at checkout. I love that. And they take the guesswork out of buying tickets, does Gametime. Download the app, create an account, use code LOCKDOWNMLB. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account, redeem our code LOCKEDONMLB. for $20 off your very first Game Time purchase. Do it in the new year. Enjoy some events. Get some money off. Use Game Time. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time. All right, so very quickly before we look at second base, let's talk about depth at first base they've created. Obviously, we know about Manzardo, Santana. This is probably a one-year reunion. I'd be surprised if there's anything more. But at first base in 2024, things went really well for Cleveland. You had CJ Kayfus had a breakout year for them in the minors. I talked about how I'd be interested in trading CJ Kayfus this offseason if it meant upgrading other places. Now that they've traded Josh Naylor, you got Manzardo. I still think you could trade CJ Kayfus. I do. But I'm definitely more intrigued to see what he can do. I think he should be the everyday starter at AAA. I know there's really nobody there. There's Mike Capriz, who Jeff and I did like as a prospect at one time. I think CJ Kayfus should be the everyday starter in 2025 at AAA. This is, again, a very Manzardo-like profile. He doesn't hit the ball especially hard, but what he does do well is he pulls the ball, he hits the ball in the air. He definitely could do better getting the ball in the air. It's kind of a 1-to-1 in terms of ground ball and fly ball rates. So he definitely could do more to get the ball in the air. I want to see him more at AAA, though. He can play some outfield. To me, CJ Kayfus is a first baseman who can play outfield versus a guy who is an outfielder, just from what I've seen. I know he played outfield a little bit in college and high school, but yeah, I think he's more of a first baseman. The strikeout rate did go up at AA, so I'm curious about that. The walk rate was still pretty good, but I do want to see more of him. I'm very interested in what CJ Kayfus can do for this team. I still think he's a really good trade asset, though. I will be honest about that. And behind him, you've got Ralphie Velasquez, who is definitely a first baseman only now. The Guardians have talked about how they want to keep catcher alive for him, and they think it would be good for him in terms of like maybe a David Fry situation. They're not comparing him to David Fry, but James Harris, I did talk to him, and he did talk about how they'd like to keep catching alive for him. That would be most advantageous. But it definitely sounds like you can expect Ralphie Velasquez to stay at first base long term, get some reps in the outfield. He had that amazing home run robbery in the outfield last year. You don't luck into home run robberies at the wall, truthfully. So I do think he can play the outfield. I don't know if he's a guy who's like CJ Kayfus, where he can play the outfield. He's a first baseman. I think there's more athleticism with Ralphie, to be honest with you. So I do think there's a guy there that could play the outfield a little bit more. But Ralphie, to me, also has to improve offensively. Like, there's a lot of power there, but there's some stuff with the swing there where he was hitting the ball to left field a lot, was not getting to his power at Lake County, if I'm being honest. The good news is the strikeout rate was still under control. The walk rate was good. But I do think he is a good bet at first base for the future as well. Definitely probably has the most power in the minors of any prospect, even more than DeLauder. I think almost as much as Noel. But I think right now, as a guy who's going to be in the minor leagues next year, I think he has the most power in the system. And then behind him, the guy we've talked about a little bit is Luis Morejo on this podcast. Really came into his own last year, really emerged. Guy with great batted ball data, hits the ball hard. Strikeout rates are in a controllable area, walks a little bit. We don't know where his future home is, but it looks like first base. He played a lot of first base last year. He did play some third. I do think in the future, though, it's looking like all first base. Luis Morejo is the guy to keep an eye on in 2025. Probably starts the year in Lynchburg. He only had 121 plate appearances, but I'd like to see him in Lake County sooner than later next year. But he's a guy that definitely is an option for the future as well. They really have depth at first base. It's amazing. This is an organization that has not had a ton of corner infield options over the last several years. It's been all middle infield, right? They really have some corner bats, and that's on potential. I know a lot of people have said, well, they haven't really developed any. Well, Kyle Manzardo, they didn't develop him, but he was in the minor league system here, and they traded for him, so there is that. Kayfus and Morejo and Ralphie, though, are guys that I think they can work with that have more power. These are not guys that are powerless. Like, Ralphie's got a ton of power. Morejo's got power. Kayfus is more of an average power guy, but kind of fits their wheelhouse a little bit. I think this is the best group they've had in a while. Whether or not they develop him is a different story, but this is the best group they've had in a while, I think. Let's quickly talk about second base before we move on to New Year's resolutions. Second base, I think, is probably less of a challenge for them in terms of an upgrade next year. I'm not saying they should have gotten rid of Andres Gimenez. I'm not saying that at all. But the reason they made these trades, they talked about the depth they have, right? And the one thing that's really questionable to me, and a friend of the show DM'd me this, and we talked about it the other day. This goes back to their interest in Gleyber Torres that we talked about on Monday's show. If you want to go back and listen to that. Juan Brito right now looks like the guy who's going to play second base for them next year. This is typically a team that doesn't want rookies to play in April in Cleveland. They always talk about how cold it is and how hard it is to hit in Cleveland in the cold months. And they'd rather have someone experienced do that, not a rookie. And right now you're looking at Juan Brito as your opening day second baseman. Is that something they really want to do? Historically, they would tell you not. Is Juan Brito a better option than we talked about Jorge Polanco? He's, those two guys. I think, again, I talked about this on Monday. I think Juan Brito, I think his best outcome probably is Jorge Polanco. Whether or not he gets there is the question. Polanco's had injury issues we talked about. Someone that they could be interested in if they were interested in Gleyber Torres, that they don't want Brito to start the year in April in Cleveland. But that's been the thing they've always talked about, right? Is they don't want young hitters to struggle in April in Cleveland because of the cold weather, which is such a weird excuse, by the way. You have to get used to it eventually. It's a weird excuse. It sounds like service time. But I wouldn't be playing service time games with Juan Brito, if I'm being honest. Not the guy I would do that with. I think we all can accept, there's no doubt, we're going to see a major downgrade defensively at second base, no matter who it is, because there's nobody on this planet that plays second base the way that Andrés Gimenez does, unless you're 1990s, Robbie Alomar, who had other issues. There's going to be a downgrade no matter what. The question is going to be, though, is Juan Brito, if he makes his debut, is he going to be good enough to hold off Travis Bazzana? Is Travis Bazzana going to hit the ground running fast enough in 2025 to force Cleveland to call him up? Given the direction they're currently going, there's still January to go. There's still February to go for the most part in terms of the offseason. But in the direction they seem to be going, I have to wonder, are they going to try to hold Travis Bazzana down for the pick in 2026 or 2027? Do you want to call him up in September and preserve his rookie eligibility for 2026? Do you really want to give Juan Brito that shot? I don't know. I don't even know if they want to start the year with Juan Brito at second base. I kind of forgot about their whole distinction of not wanting hitters to hit in April in Cleveland, because young players to hit in Cleveland in April because of the weather. It sounds silly. Every time I say it, every time I think about it, it continues to sound even sillier than it ever has. So I still think there's a chance for them to make a move at second base because of that. Whether that's going to be a trade or that's going to be, I think for sure it's a 1-year guy, no matter what. It's a 1-year guy. Whether that forces Juan Brito to force their hand or Travis Bazzana at some point. I think offensively, it's not going to be that hard to replace Andrés Gimenez. The only place I'm really concerned about is the speed, obviously, and the defense. Defensively, we know it's a downgrade. Offensively, my concern is the speed. Like right now, if you look at Steamer, and this is 271 plate appearances, Juan Brito is projected to have a 98 WRC plus. Most of that is buoyed by a 318 on base, which was a struggle for Gimenez. He didn't get on base because of his chase rate and because of his issues hitting weak ground balls. Brito's not really an exit velocity guy either. The one thing Brito does that Andrés Gimenez doesn't is he hits fly balls in the air and he pulls them and he walks. So I think on a basic level offensively, I think you're going to get an upgrade at second base next year, no matter what. I think the question is it going to be enough to offset the defense and speed? The speed is a real concern because Juan Brito is not a great runner. We know he's not a great defender. Travis Bazzana is a good runner, but he's got things to learn in terms of reading guys and just, flat straight line speed is probably pretty good. I don't have any concerns about Travis Bazzana working to become better in any of these areas and using all of his tools. Obviously, we know Travis Bazzana is the long-term answer at second base, and he should be better than Andrés Gimenez in all facets, except for maybe defense. But I think speed for next year is one of those things I'd be concerned about, and that it does matter in offense. Andrés Gimenez was a great asset for speed, not just in terms of steals, but in terms of how smart he was as a base runner, the value he added on the bases. Question was, he just wasn't getting on base enough for them, unfortunately. Maybe Juan Brito gets on base more, but doesn't contribute as much with his speed. So he's got to do a little bit more. And he's not a guy who's likely to go first to third like Gimenez. So those are things that you're going to have a lot of give and take on. So, I mean, I would expect that if you're just looking at WRC plus, which maybe that's an imperfect way to look at it, probably a good chance there's an upgrade there. But there are things Gimenez did very well. Like I said, speed is one of them that contributed. I don't think you're going to get that. So when you look on the whole of things, I would be more likely to see a downgrade at second base in 2024, whereas I feel more optimistic at first base, which is odd to say considering how good Josh Naylor's numbers were offensively. I just think that if you're looking at the whole picture of things at second base, given that Brito might be a rookie, and I really do believe in Brito too. I like the offensive skill set in terms of being able to pull the ball and put the ball in the air, but it's going to take some time for him. And we know, again, Cleveland's all not playing in April and September. So maybe it won't, or in April, maybe it won't be him. Maybe it'll be somebody else. Eventually it should be Travis Bazzana. But I think there's a good chance that on the whole, if you look at offense and defense, there's a chance that this is a downgrade in 2025. Whereas I think Santana and Manzardo, I feel much more comfortable with a scenario where things look better. And then you get the return of David Fry at some point. Maybe that's also a thing. Or they add somebody else to the DH mix. I don't know. Fry will DH when he comes back, and he'll be healthier. That should be better too. We'll see. All right. I'll talk a little bit about depth at second base here and the New Year's resolutions for 2025. I might have just hinted at one area I think the Guardians need to get better at next year. I'll talk about that on the end of today's show. Oh, it is that time of year, the NFL playoffs. It's not too late to get on the last week of regular season NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, if you are a new customer for week 18 of the NFL, you can finish strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. The Browns, they do not want to beat Baltimore. Baltimore wants to win, I think, for seeding. I'm not keeping up with that, but I know Baltimore probably needs it for seeding purposes. And let's be honest, they're not going to have any resistance in the Browns. If you're a new customer of FanDuel, honestly, I'm taking $5. I'm betting on the Ravens to win that game. And then I'm taking my $250 in bonus bets to pick up other W's, betting on which players are going to score a touchdown, how many points each team's going to score, all that kind of stuff. College, the football playoffs are going on in college, so you can do that. Not only can you bet on who's going to win the game, but you have which players are going to score a touchdown, how many points each team's going to score, all that and more on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com today, FanDuel.com, for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. If you're a new customer, make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, before we get into New Year's resolutions for the Guardians, let's talk about depth at second base. We just talked about Burrito. We know about Travis Bazzana. That's where the depth, that's where the future is. And honestly, the only way that anybody else should be playing second base in 2026 for Cleveland is if Travis Bazzana moves to another position. We're not going to manifest injury or anything crazy. The only way in 2026 the second baseman for Cleveland is not Travis Bazzana is if they decide to move him in the outfield. That's the only way. They have to. And I want to talk in the future about locking into a long-term extension and what that looks like. We got to do that too. But let's talk about other middle infield guys. Let's imagine a scenario where Travis Bazzana does move to another position, because we almost did that. Before they traded Andres Gimenez, Jeff and I agreed that Travis Bazzana was probably going to go into 2025 playing as much outfield as he did second base. Not the case anymore. Cleveland's got no issues at depth at second base, and that's the reason Chris Antonetti talked about trading Andres Gimenez was depth in the middle infield, which he's not wrong about because they've spent so many resources on middle infield over the last couple of years, trying to bring in guys they knew could eventually give them some cover for trading Francisco Lindor. Brian Rocchio's there. That's, still TBD on that, right? Juan Brito, they obviously really liked in the trade for Nolan Jones. He could be a solution at second base if they move Travis Bazzana. I do think Brito can play somewhere else too. I do think that, I don't know, if they ever move Steven Kwan off left field, he could play left, but I don't buy they're going to. So maybe Brito's the guy they eventually trade or DH him or something if when Bazzana emerges. Other areas in middle infield, though, are interesting. a lot of people like Welbin Francisca as a shortstop. I'm not as high as Welbin Francisca as a lot of people are in the industry is. Again, he's a guy I'd love to use as trade bait, but it's great to have that depth. If you want to trade him for something, they should trade him for something. He is a guy who is going to start the next year in either Lynchburg or Lake County. He is not going to impact your team in 25 or 26, probably not 27. Definitely a guy I would look to use in a trade to make up somewhere else because they have the depth. The guys above him, it's a little more questionable. The only guy in the system I really love in the middle infield is Angel Hanau. I don't think Angel Hanau needs to play second base in the future. I think he can play short. I know he can play third. They don't need a third baseman in the next several years anyway, and they should never need one until Jose retires, because we also know he's not going to accept DHing very often. Angel Hanau, though, to me, is a guy who is definitely a top 5 prospect. He might be a number 2 prospect in the system. I'm working on that right now, personally. That's a guy you could trade, but if I traded Angel Hanau, Angel Hanau, I would be holding out a king's ransom for him. They know Cleveland's very stringent when it comes to trade values and players they value. I would use Angel Hanau in a trade, but I'd be very, very careful about what you get back. It would have to be a very long-term valuable asset. I'm very high on Angel Hanau. And again, I think he has more than enough arm to play the left side of the infield, so I wouldn't stick him in second, but he could play second. He could play a good second if they decided to move Travis Bazan to the outfield, which I would love in a future Guardians lineup to feature Travis Bazan on Angel Hanau. That would be fantastic. More likely it's short and second, if I'm being honest, but either way, I think both their bats in this lineup would be really good for Cleveland maybe in 2028. I don't know. But I would definitely use Welbin Francisco as a trade. I don't think he can play short, and I think he's a guy you can afford to trade. Khalil Watson's still hanging around. Didn't have a great year. He's more of a utility player now. Diane Frias is more of a third baseman, but he didn't hit much last year. Middle infield's a little bit different right now. I think, they have some depth there, and Bazana and Brito, and there's obviously Hanau and Francisco. There's, that's most of the guys they have, though. This is probably the least deep middle infield they've had in terms of minor league depth in a long time. There are guys like that have come in, like Jose Devers. They signed another Gabriel Rodriguez, who people really like. They don't know what their future is going to look like. But in terms of actually depth going to 2025, based off what they did in 2024, it's a pretty shallow group. To me, it's Hanau and Francisca and Bazana, and that's it. And I'm really not that high on Francisca. Everybody else is just kind of minor league. There's Alex Mooney, but I think he's a third baseman, so to me doesn't count as a middle infielder right now. It's a weaker group than it has been in years past, which is really interesting. The corners, and maybe even the outfield, when you talk about DeLauder and Churio, I guess we're going to include Martinez in that group. Alfonso and Rosario right now is interesting, and Nick Mitchell. It's a good minor league group, but yeah, middle infield's not as strong as it has been in years past. The corners are a little more interesting than they used to be for Cleveland. All right, New Year's resolutions for Cleveland in 2025. Real quickly here, we're all making New Year's resolutions. We're all going to stick to them. No doubt about that, right? We all know that that's a thing that we're all very good at, is making New Year's resolutions on New Year's Day and then looking back at December 31st and accomplish all of them. The first one for me for Cleveland, I think in 2025, is a better base running team. And what I mean by that is their value and just being smart on the bases. So last year they were top 5 in steals, right? They stole 148 bases. That was 5th in baseball, tied for 5th. But very far behind Washington at 223, Milwaukee at 217, and obviously Cincinnati at 207 because they have Ellie De La Cruz. Cleveland was pretty firmly in that group, though. Outside of that group, they were only in the running for 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th. They're in the top 10 for sure. But they got to be better next year. I think that's going to be hard without Andres Gimenez, as I talked about before. When you look at FanGraphs' base running metric, that includes runs above average, includes stolen bases and caught stealing, taking the extra base. That includes just being smart on the bases and taking extra bases. They were 17th at -1. In years past, with Jose Ramirez and Carlos Santana and Mike Napoli even, and Jason Kipnis and Francisco Lindor, they were really good at smart base running, taking the extra base, tagging up, effective stolen base rate, not getting caught a lot. They have been much better in years past. Last year, they were 17th. if this team is going to get by on bottom 10 power, if we're talking about a team that finishes middle of the pack to 20th in power, you've got to be a better base running team. And that's not just stealing bases. And I said, they're going to lose speed with Andres Gimenez. Juan Brito is not going to make up for that, no doubt. They've got to run better. Brian Rocchio's got to be a better runner. He's not good at sprint speed. So I don't know where that's going to come from. Jose Ramirez has to run. Lane Thomas has to run. Steven Kwan has to run. Carlos Santana is a smart base runner, but he's 39. Is that going to keep up? I don't know. It's a very reasonable question to ask. Bo Naylor was a good base runner in the minors. He has to do that next year. And other guys that they might have this year need to run the bases, whoever that is. I don't know if you can ask Chase DeLaw to run the bases if he makes the majors this year, because who knows with his feet. They have got to be a better base running team in 2025. Starting rotation's got to be better. I think the starting rotation will be better next year, or 2025. We're already here. I think it will be better. I don't see how it could be any worse, truthfully, outside of massive amounts of injuries, but they've got to give one last shot to Tristan McKenzie. They've got to figure out Logan Allen and Gavin Williams from a year ago. They've got to trust Tanner Bybee more, I think, to be the guy we know he can be. They got to trust him a little bit more. Ben Lively, they got to trust him after what he did last year as well. Starting rotation has to go deeper. The bullpen's going to regress. And that's not saying they're not going to be good. It's just saying the bullpen, it's very unlikely they are going to be anywhere near as good as they were a year ago. Cade Smith, first full year in the bigs. Hunter Gaddis, first time as a reliever in the bigs. Tim Herron, first full year in the majors. You know, he was up and down in AAA the year before, even though he pitched a full season. You're not going to have Sam Henches next year. Trevor Steffen's coming off Tommy John. A lot of these guys pitched a lot of innings and deep into the playoffs last year. We saw Manuel Clase break down in the playoffs for weird reasons. The bullpen's not going to be as good next year as it was in 2024 or in 2025. We can guarantee that. So the starting rotation is going to have to be better. And I think that's part of picking up Luis Ortiz, Slade Ciccone. They got to figure that out too. I think it will be better. The question is, will it be better enough to offset the bullpen's regression, which the bullpen can still be very good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the bullpen is going to be a disaster. I hope it's not, because that's never good. But bullpens are fickle, even the best ones. I think the bullpen will still be good in 2025, but it's going to regress. There's no doubt. And hopefully getting Steffen back, and hopefully a guy like Franco Alaman can help you there, right? Hopefully a guy like, maybe you put Slade Ciccone in the bullpen. You know, maybe you find other guys too that go there. Maybe Cantillo goes to the bullpen. Somebody else. I don't know. It's going to regress. In terms of player development, I want to see the Guardians take some more chances in the draft. This is a team for 3 years now, at least going back 3 years, that has been last in the majors in hard hit rate. And a lot of that has to do with them drafting contact first players. They love contact first players, but they're drafting contact first players after the first round. They're signing contact first players when it comes to international free agency. I'd like to see them get a little more aggressive in terms of player acquisition. You know, they tend to trade for guys that have power versus trying to draft guys that have power. And I understand that, because as an amateur, it's very hard to determine hit tool. It's very hard. But exit velocities. I don't know. I just think that it would be great to see them vary more of their depth in the minors. It's fine to take guys who are contact oriented and see if you can develop power. But should you do it? Let's say you take 10 hitters and 10 pitchers. Should all 10 hitters be guys that are contact first? You want to teach power? Should it be 6 guys who are contact first and 4 guys that maybe need some refinement in their swings? I don't know. I'm not an expert at this. There's a reason I'm talking to you into my microphone and not doing this for the Guardians. So I could be completely just blowing air here, which, you know, let's be honest, most times I am. But I'd like to see a little bit more variation in the minor league system in terms of tools. We talk about all the time about how they don't have guys with big raw tools. They have guys that are contact, speed, defense. Those don't carry in terms of trade value, and there's less to fall back on in the majors if they don't work out. You know, they've done the Will Benson and Nolan Jones thing, and those guys have had various levels of success and failures at the major league level. But they used Nolan Jones to trade for something they really liked. We'll see if that works out. But it's a skill set I wish they would at least, you know, they've done it with a little bit with Ralphie Velasquez, who I don't think is as big of a risk as it could be, but it's still a bit of a risk. The Lauder was more of a health risk. I'd just like to see them maybe take someone in the 4th round who maybe has a little bit of power and maybe struggles with contact a little bit and see if they can do something about that. Just at least give yourself some options in the minors versus the same kind of player all over again. All right, before we get out of here, I want to talk about one more thing. I mentioned on Monday's show that we are going to be having an insider program in 2025. A little bit more information on the insider program in 2025. Let me tell you a little bit. This is what I can tell you. So if you sign up to be an insider for Locked On Guardians, what we're going to be able to give you is a lot more access to Jeff and I in terms of questions, answers, conversations. We'll be able to do insider exclusive mailbag shows. Jeff and I are going to do a lot more prospect and draft content there. A little more observations whenever we get insider information. If we do get it, that's the first place we'll share it. Just more conversations with us. That's not going to change anything on the podcast. We're still going to be here 5 days a week, free on every platform you get podcast, YouTube. None of that changes. You'll never pay for any of that. That's always going to be the same. The insider program, like I said, is really just going to be us chatting in a more personal way. We're just going to be, instead of, if there's a transaction or something that happens in a game, my first place to go instead of tweeting it or on Blue Sky will be to our insiders. And then eventually it'll filter its way there. But that'll be the first place I give observations, news. Like I said, we'll do Q&As there. We'll do exclusive mailbag episodes for insiders as well as any prospect and draft content we come up with. We'll also share that there exclusively as well. And any other insider info or conversations we're having will go there as well. That isn't launched yet, but it will be up and running here soon. I'm imagining closer to spring training, but that's what it's going to look like. So if you're interested in that, continue to let us know. Like I said, changes nothing about the podcast. It's just an additional thing that's out there that we'll be talking about in 2025. I will be back on Friday with you again. It's going to be a mailbag episode, so please hit me with your questions. Also, would love if you're sending questions for 2025. Would also love to hear your thoughts on the offseason so far. And if you're not happy with the offseason, which is understandable, let us know what you want to see next. What do you think is the next step for the Guardians in the offseason? So hit us with questions for the Friday mailbag episode and let us know about your assessment of the offseason so far and what you want to see next. In the meantime, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe. Oh, you know what? Let's do a quick review. I do have a couple of Apple Podcast reviews that I want to get out there. I really appreciate that we haven't gotten to. 1220, Naderade 28 left us a great one. Said that Jeff and I are both accessible. We answer questions on different platforms. We don't shy away from tough subjects. Thorough with analysis of minor league prospects, team approaches, financials. We don't always agree, which is interesting. Sometimes I feel like we agree too much. But he says we don't yell for clicks like national types, actual organizational coverage. We address the draft, the system, other systems, hypothetical strengths, weaknesses, suggest players would like to see. Great listen. Thank you, Nate. Thank you to POW as well, who gave us a great review. And Devil in America, or Dave. I almost said Devil. Geez. Dave in America said, we're the smartest Guardians podcast. If we're the smartest Guardians podcast, I'd hate to see not the smartest. I can't talk anymore. It's time for me to get out of here. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for the reviews. Appreciate it. Be back on Friday. Get those mailbag questions in. And until then, go Guardians, go.